Hello everybody, and thanks for joining me. I've got a lot to do today and not a whole lot of time to do it. We're just over a week away from having our third child, and I got to make sure everything's prepped and ready to go. Hey there ladies and gentlemen and my pig friends. How are you guys doing today? So I finally came up with a name for him. I've settled on Mr. T. That's right, your name's now Mr. T. I don't have food for you right now, buddy. So I don't really want to bore you with just going around and doing all the chores that I've got to do. But what I am going to do is actually address a question or a conversation that I had the other day regarding gardening, and I would say general farming, homesteading at all. It was an interesting conversation, and I will almost definitely tangent. That's just what I end up doing, so be forewarned. Guys, I still don't have food for you. Still don't have food. So the conversation I had the other day started with me just telling them that I was getting ready to do some garden planting and trying to figure out what I was going to plant and where I was going to plant it and things of that nature. And the question that I got was, well, why would you plant a garden when you could just go to the grocery and get what you need? It's a lot less work. And so that sparked a relatively long debate, actually. And even beyond that, a lot of kind of internal thought of, like, how do you properly answer that question without just, you know, stating the obvious? Like, there's always a deeper reasoning. Excuse me. Excuse me. All right. So my first and most immediate response is an obvious one, which is, well, I want to grow my own food. The thing about that kind of response was, in hindsight, I realized that it's really kind of a hollow response. It's really just stating the obvious. You know, there's a deeper of, well, why do you want to grow your own food? And there are a myriad of reasons why different people might want to. But I've thought a lot about, for me specifically, and it's something I've talked about, but not something that I've really considered, like, how to verbalize. I feel like anytime something like that comes up, it always goes to one of two things. It's either, oh, you're just trying to get off grid, which isn't the case. I'm not really trying to get off grid here. The other response is usually like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. But that response usually only ever comes from people who have either had gardens or had relatives that had gardens. Now, another really easy response for me was, well, I want to know how the food was grown. And that goes beyond just the garden. That goes for all my animals as well. The eggs, the chicken, you know, the eventual pork, like, you know, and anything else we decide to grow. For me, it's, I want to know what goes in my food. Now, I know conversations along those lines tend to generate a lot of conflict, and people will debate, you know, the GMOs or whether it's good to spray or using fertilizers and all these different things. And I'm not really interested in debating those things. There are things that I've studied, and I'm no scientist, but there are things that I'm gonna trial and error, and the only way I can really trial and error that is knowing exactly what's in my food. And as somebody who has some food allergies, this gives me an opportunity to test some theories. What's up, Twinkle? What you doing, buddy? One of my chores is actually getting rid of a bunch of cardboard because I forgot to take the trash down this week. So I figured this is as good a time as any to continue our conversation. Now, at one point during that conversation, I remember saying that I think everybody should have a garden. Now, one of the reasons I said that is because I do believe that having access to your own food that you grow gives you a little bit more freedom and control over not just what you eat, but what you have access to be able to eat. You know, we're pretty blessed in our circumstances, so, you know, where we can do things. For example, you know, I really subscribe to the idea of, you know, in my mind, the American dream. And the American dream being, you know, go to school, get educated, get a good job, get paid well, and therefore you've got the money to do anything you need or want. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, you know, I don't have a lot of that. I did go to school. I did get a good job. It does pay well. It's maybe not as fulfilling as it used to be, but the reality is it gives me the opportunities to really be able to afford and start building out something like this. But the reason I bring that up will kind of go along with probably a lot of the reasons why other people have, especially recently, started trying to provide their own food. And that is, you know, during COVID, you know, just because you had the money doesn't mean you had access to the things that we've kind of taken for granted. You know, there were shortages, and as I thought about that over the past, you know, couple of weeks and months even, you know, over even just the last couple of years, there's different things that happen, and then you could go way back in history into different famines and things of that nature that have caused, you know, global shortages. But I'll bring COVID up because COVID's the one that, you know, really has kick-started this idea for a lot of people. And for us, you know, there was never a time where we just went completely without. So I don't want to oversell this. When there wasn't food on the shelf, like, there wasn't food on the shelf, and, you know, we're still dealing with that to some degree. And you know, I won't get into all the, you know, philosophical or political things. It's really not the point. You know, the point is, for me, just because I had the money, there were times where things that we were looking for, we didn't have. And there were many other people that had it worse. I mean, there were people looking for baby formula and baby food. And, you know, some of the baby food stuff did affect us, but not severely. And really, I can summarize all of that by just simply saying that if you're growing your own food, at least you have access to the things you're growing. And for me, that was a lot of the reason why I decided that I wanted to try to have my own place and do things. Now, getting back to that whole idea of, you know, everybody should have a garden, I spent a lot of time thinking about that statement because that's not something that's necessarily easily available to everybody. But what I did kind of come to the conclusion of is that I do think that literally anybody can grow stuff, almost anywhere. For example, you know, you can go out and toss out a pumpkin, and the next year, there's a decent shot that you'll have a pumpkin growing. I mean, heck, when we moved in here, I did nothing, absolutely nothing. And we had a pumpkin grow, we had tomatoes grow over by the telephone pole. You know, back here we had some corn grow. You know, we had some sorghum growing here by the house. And I doubt any of that was specifically sown. It was very likely just errant seeds thrown on the ground. And that's kind of the point, is that while that may not be the most efficient, you could just about just toss seeds out and do nothing else and probably have something grow, just with it being outside in reasonable conditions. Another example is that you can go on, you know, YouTube or read forums or literally just about anywhere and find people who are growing stuff all over the place. There's people that are, you know, sprouting, you know, tree seeds in their refrigerator, and people growing all kinds of stuff in baskets on their balconies, or in their small front yard. There's very little that would prevent somebody from at least being able to grow something somewhere. And really, that just kind of brings me back to this idea that it wasn't that long ago, even in American history, that if you didn't have, you know, your own garden or your own livestock, you probably didn't eat much. People had their own, I forget what they call it, like their own sustenance homestead, if you will, where if you didn't grow food of your own, you really didn't have access to things. And of course, with technology, that's changed, but But what if things again aren't there, right? If you don't have the money to buy them because things get more expensive, which they do, growing a garden doesn't really get that much more expensive. I mean, sure, the seeds are going to get more expensive, but realistically you could keep seeds and replant them, and then your cost goes down. And sure, without fertilizer, or without maybe the chickens to fertilize, or whatever your means are, maybe the yield isn't as great, right? Or obviously there's more work involved than just hopping in your car and driving down the road. But there are options, and this way you take your food security into your own hands a little bit. Now, the actual best part of about that conversation is that it actually caused me to reflect a little bit and not just give hollow responses that are, just no real substance. It really gave me the opportunity to reflect on my convictions and why I'm trying to do what I'm trying to do. Now, speaking of gardens, I did actually say in my last video that I was expecting my next video to be about seed starts, but a couple of things that I'm still waiting on in the mail to get here, plus a few other things that I'm going to plan. I've still got to do a little bit of like thinking and walking around and just looking at my options, but I do expect to do that soon. Hopefully we'll do that before the baby's born, but if not, it'll probably be that week after if I get enough rest to do it. But either way, I intend to get some seed starts going pretty soon. My daughter really wants to help, so I want to make sure that I got an opportunity to work with her to do it. It's exciting that she wants to get involved in doing some of these things, and who should I be to stand in the way of that? That's honestly just part of doing this. I really want to be able to do some things like that with my family. Either way, I really appreciate you joining us. If you've watched to this point, again, I really appreciate it. It's becoming more exciting. I'm actually getting a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera, maybe just a little bit. For the record, it's kind of awkward talking to yourself out in the middle of a field, especially when people are driving by and, just make you feel like a little bit like you're crazy. But either way, I appreciate you watching. Hopefully you enjoyed. We'll catch you next time.